Hi, William here again. Now, before we launch into this week's project, I just want to take a step back to last week, where I promised to do a follow-up on my take of Mike Waldts' YouTube video on glue blocks. Now, to recap, about a week ago, Mike uploaded a video incorporating a hex nut into a glue block. Now, Mike's concept provides a very economic and a very stable platform for a glue block. Now, when I saw Mike's video, which was typically inspirational, I immediately ordered a few 33mm by 3.5mm hex nuts which fit both of my lathes, and decided to have a go for myself. So here's what I did in pictures. So I'm going to in fact make two glue blocks, a small one and a larger one. And I'm going to use two pieces of oak offcuts for this job. The larger of the two blocks will be thicker than the smaller one. Now I've got the blocks square on the bandsaw, I'm going to start off by drilling a hole in the centre to the diameter across the flats of the nut, which is 50mm. Now the hole's drilled, I'm just going to mark out the shape of the nut around the hole and use a chisel to make the shape of the nut. Now the next stage was to glue the hex nuts in place using 5-minute epoxy resin, ensuring that all the possible gaps are filled up to ensure the nut is actually a tight fit in the wooden block. Having given it a couple of hours to ensure that the epoxy sets hard, time to put it on the lathe and true it up. Also, I've taken the opportunity to drill a hole down the centre to pass an awl through should you need to. And here I've marked the position of the 6 screw holes using the lathe's very primitive indexing system. So next step then is to drill the holes for the screws and then countersink them. So this is what the two blocks look like with the screws in place. Next step is to find two sacrificial pieces of wood which will be glued to the project. So here I've got both the sacrificial blocks roughly shaped on a bandsaw. Once I've now screwed them to the block, I can put them on the lathe and just finish them off, making sure that the surface to be glued is perfectly flat. Now, I'm not claiming for a minute that what I've done is any better than what Mike has done. It's just a slightly different take on his concept. But at least using this methodology, you can screw on the additional piece of wood, which you can then use as your glue face, or glue it directly to the block, in which case you'll lose a bit each time you use it. Now, moving on to this week's project. It is the birthday of a friend, a lady in the village, in February, and I did ask her what she would like me to make for her birthday, explaining that things on a lathe are traditionally round. She replied that actually she would like something made on the lathe which is square, which is a little bit of a challenge, I guess, but a quick trawl of some magazines and YouTube channels revealed a number of options. Now, Furtado, the rebel turner, whose work I admire very much and always happy to see new videos that he's uploaded to YouTube, recently produced a beveled square bowl. Now, looking around my wood pile, I had a look to see whether or not I could find the right pieces of timber to produce something a little bit similar. So I found a couple of pieces of oak which I think will fit the bill quite well. Now, I do like wood with history, and I do get my feedstock from a wide range of sources. And in this particular case, the future recipient of this project and the previous owner have a connection. Now, the connection is between the two that they are both owners of black Range Rovers. However, the husband of the previous owner of the timber recently had a bit of an accident with their black Range Rover, so I guess that connection is broken. Okay then, so I'm planning for the top of the bowl to be square, which will be about 10 inches, maybe 11 inches, yeah, 11 inches by 4 inches deep. And the sides will be angled. I'll need to cut them at an angle on the bandsaw, and to have a base which mirrors the bowl itself, but at about 1/3 of the size, so that the two angle together correctly. So the first task then is to get both pieces of timber squared up on the bandsaw. So I've marked out on two sides of the wood, reducing the difference between the top and the bottom by 66%. Now, I've never cut anything at an angle on a bandsaw, well, not intentionally anyway, so this is a new experience for me. So having spent a little time setting up the bandsaw, I can now make the first two cuts. Now, to cut the other two sides, I need to remake a square edge to run along the guide. So I thought the easiest way to do this was to temporarily reattach the two pieces I've just cut off using hot glue. Now, I'm taking a quick pause here because I think I may have made a fundamental mistake, and that mistake might have been that the top and the bottom of the piece of wood, the blank that I'm going to produce a bowl from, may not be parallel. If they're not parallel, then the whole bowl will be out of true. Now, I could have avoided this by, before I put the blank on the bandsaw to cut the angles, I could have put it on a faceplate on both sides and trued it up. That way I would have known that the top and the bottom were in fact parallel. Well, contrary to my fears, the piece appears to be running reasonably true. Now, there's not an awful lot of space to play with on the base of this bowl, so I'm going to need to use my O'Donnell jaws. And to reduce the chances of the wood breaking away from the jaws, I did in fact put a layer of thin CA glue in the recess. And also this recess will provide me a way of fixing it to the base. Now, during the sanding process, I hit upon the idea of giving the bowl an irregular rim and colouring it black. The reason being it looked way too sharp and angular and, I don't know, quite boring, I guess. So to achieve this, I had to go back and do a bit of profiling with some abrasives by hand. And also at this point it occurred to me that I would need to replicate this random rim on the base of the bowl. So here I'm just using some neat black intrinsic colour to get this effect. Okay then, so that's the bowl itself more or less completed. It will just need a final buff up before I mount it onto the base. So moving on to the base of the bowl, I wanted it to be obviously a smaller but a mirror image of the bowl itself. I've had a couple of goes at cutting out or roughing out a piece of timber to do the job, but didn't have much success. I think I might need a new bandsaw blade. So anyway, I had to resort to the help of a carpenter, a grown-up if you like, to help me out here, who just happened to be my father, who is still doing carpentry and still wood turning, approaching his 88th birthday. So thanks, Dad, for helping me out with this. I've now got to profile this to get it to exactly fit the base of the bowl and make it kind of symmetrical with the random rim that I intend having on the bottom. So there we have it then, the finished square bowl in English oak. A few lessons learned and a few mistakes along the way. Primarily it isn't quite square, which made it a bit challenging, and that was because I failed to ensure that the face of the bowl part and the base of the bowl part were not parallel, and I could have avoided this by truing up the blank on the lathe before I took it to the bandsaw. Now, the addition of the black rim around the top was a veiled attempt at trying to hide some of the errors in this, but in fact I like it very much. I think without the black rim around there it would have been quite boring and a bit too Andy Warhol. Anyway, I'm pleased with the outcome and I learned some lessons on the way, so it's a win-win for me. Now lastly, to acknowledge Furtado for his inspiration for this bowl from his recent YouTube video, and again to Mike Waldts for inspiring me to reinvent the faceplate. Okay, thanks for watching and hope to see you again soon.